Okay. Welcome everyone to Phoenixville Library. Those of you in the room and on Zoom, come on in, plenty of seats. And we are glad to present tonight the first of which will be several collaborations with the Phoenixville Historical Society in celebration of the Historical Society's recent renovations and soon to be open to the public, the museum. We are pleased to have with us tonight Joe Varady of the Historical Society. He's also a former teacher at the Barkley School, author of Tales of Phoenixville, which you'll hear more about, and has been busy designing the new museum at the Historical Society. Tonight he presents on Lenape artifacts at the museum and elsewhere. And go ahead, Joe, take it away. Oh, before you take it away, those on Zoom, if you have questions, please type them into the chat. At the end of the program, you'll get a chance to unmute yourself, but if you have any burning questions, type them into the chat before the end. All right, take it away.
All right, so my name is Joe Varady. I am a member of the Historical Society. I was also, as he mentioned, a teacher at Barkley Elementary for 10 years. I taught 5th grade over there. Where do I get my information about Native Americans? Well, one of the first is reading. You always need to stay up on the latest literature, and one of the big ones is Herbert Kraft, and then this is a more recent book, and it's the archaeology of the Native Americans, how they find these things, how they date them, and why they think the things that they do. And so it's a fantastic book for those who are interested in taking a deep dive. So we'll go to our first slide here. Or will we, Mark?
There we go.
There we go. All
Okay.
right. This is me teaching at Barkley Elementary School in the 1990s. You can see I have a bunch of Indian artifacts there behind me, and I'm teaching a bit here on American prehistory. So that's kind of neat. Oh, and you might notice the Sasquatch print up there in the upper. That'll come up again in a minute too when we start talking. This is my dad, Joe Varady Sr. He owned Earth's Corner Jewelers and Earth's Echoes Science and Nature store down by James Way, Valley Forge Mall there. But my dad was walking these fields when he was a kid back in the late 40s, early 50s, and he would collect the points, and so he would take me walking, but that wasn't until the 70s, and we didn't find nearly as much as he found when he was younger. But what he's holding there are actually dinosaur tracks that came from Douglasville. And
Joe, I'm sorry, the people on Zoom are not seeing the slides. Is that true? You're not. Okay.
We will address that. Thank you.
I will address that right now. Where are we? Zoom. Okay.
So those tracks are now on display as part of our new paleontology wing at the Historical Society. We have some.
How about now, folks? On Zoom?
Got it, Mark.
Thank you.
Got it. Excellent.
Okay.
All right, the one you missed. Let's see.
Let
Here's
me
the
get
one.
I gotta go back to the other screen so you can use the PowerPoint. It's this one.
There we go. All right. So that was the shot of me teaching my 5th graders back in the 90s. So I've been doing this shtick for like 30 years. My cousin does Betsy Ross. If you've ever seen Betsy Ross in Philly or anywhere around, that's probably my cousin Carol. She does an absolutely wonderful job. So I guess it's just something in our blood about, educating, and we do it in a very edutainment fashion. We like to educate and entertain at the same time. So I'd like to thank my dad for turning me on to all of this. This is what Pennsylvania looked like at the end of the last ice age. Those ice sheets stopped about 60 miles north of us. So we were in this warm area to the south, and that meant megafauna. This is out of order. Tales of Phoenixville, that's my book. And if you are interested in Phoenixville, I have 10 tales that span 400 years, one about every 40 years, and I packed a lot of history in there. It's fantastic. All right, so Our first hunters here were Paleo-Indian hunters, and they were probably hunting this megafauna. They were hunting woolly mammoths. Here you can see he's got a young woolly mammoth in a creek where its mobility is limited and it's away from the herd. It's in the woods where it can't charge and rush. This is the way that you would want to hunt one of these animals. And from far away, using an addle, that's a spear thrower that can help you throw the spear farther and stronger. So these were the pre-Clovis. So pre-Clovis people hunted these big giant woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, animals like that. This is how they wanted to hunt them, by the way. And I'd imagine more often than not, end up like this. Right? Oh, run. So how do we know that these animals existed here? Well, this is my picture of the Port Kennedy Bone Cave, which is located in Valley Forge. And when they were mining for limestone, they hit this huge cave, and it happened to be full of Ice Age fossils. So at one point, it was a crevice in the middle of a field, and nobody's mowing the lawn back then, so the grass is 3-4 feet high. And you can see here I have this mastodon. I was being chased by a saber-tooth. Neither one's going to see this crack. They stumble right in it, fall 40 feet to their death, hopefully. Otherwise, they're down there all mangled and have to wait to die. But so many animals were in here, everything from little squirrels and turtles and snakes, all the way up to giant ground sloths and dire wolves, and of course, mastodons. They did not find any human bones in the Port Kennedy Bone Cave. It is still there. It is under 5-6 feet of fill, but that fill is contaminated with asbestos, so you can't dig through it. So it's sealed for future generations. That's a good thing. So in 100 years, 200 years from now, they can build a building over it, and we can have natural history as well as national history right here. It would rival Dinosaur National Monument out west, and to have something like that out here in the east is really special. So the people that were hunting, the Clovis people. Well, now we're into the Clovis people. This is about 10,000 years ago. We're at the end of the Ice Age, the end of that megafauna, and here we see one of their Clovis points. It's a fluted point. It was a high technology. They were attaching it onto a foreshaft. The foreshaft then locked onto another shaft that then they would throw. So I didn't have to carry 10 spears. I had a bunch of these points in a bag, and I only had 2 shafts, and just one and a backup. And that way, and I could use my shaft as a walking stick most of the time, and time to hunt, pull out a point, stick it on there, and now you're ready to rock and roll. So they would hit the animal, it would penetrate the thick hide, the shaft would fall off, the blood would keep running, and they would just keep trying to get as many of these things into the animal as they can. How do we know they lived here? This is a Clovis point right here from Phoenixville. This came from the Black Rock, and it came from a PICO archaeology survey. When they put in the power lines, they always do an archaeology survey, and they came up with this. So the provenance on it is fantastic. Their archaeologists are the ones who identified it as a Clovis point, although you can tell by the fluting down the middle what it is, but it's our oldest point that we have, and it's about 10,000 years old. Now we know that these nomadic hunters were coming in here, they were hunting, they weren't staying, they would come in, they'd stay a little while, and then they'd leave again. We know by their campsites. Their campsites didn't have very much. It just had, the remains of one meal and, some points, and that's about it. If they had stayed a long time, we would have seen storage pits and shelters and things like that. But instead, they were staying in things like the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter, which is out west of us, out near Pittsburgh, and that rock shelter kept everything under it dry for thousands of years. And the archaeologists were able to determine that people were there 16,000 years ago. So if they were a couple hundred miles west of us 16,000 years ago, you can be sure that they were here 16,000 years ago, even though we don't have the evidence directly. But here's a Clovis point that says someone was here 10,000 years ago. And then about 10,000 years ago, a little later, they stopped making these. They stopped fluting them that same way, and so we can date things by that. This is another absolutely amazing artifact that we have. This was found on 6th and Main at what used to be called Buck's Pond, because there was a pond there. The pond's been drained and buildings have been built. But it's an obsidian razor found by the Ayers family. It's in their family collection. Obsidian does not occur naturally east of the Mississippi River. The closest deposit of obsidian is going to be Yellowstone National Park. And then past that, Washington State, you could go to Mexico and you can find it. But either way, this obsidian razor came to us through, now either somebody traveled all that way by themselves on foot, which is very unlikely, we're talking 3,000 miles on foot. More likely, this is evidence of prehistoric trade networks that connected communities all across the US. And so they were sharing things like this obsidian, which flaked like nothing else around here. Closest thing you get around here is flint. And it's nothing like obsidian. Obsidian is volcanic glass, and that razor must have an incredible story behind it. This is a collection of points that my dad collected on the Black Rock on Tunnel Hill, right on the north side of town. And by the way, you have your point that you showed me. It's close to this one. It's even closer to this one over here, right? And those are later woodland points. A lot of these, we used to say arrowheads. Oh, we're going arrowhead collecting. But very few of these are actually arrowheads. These are projectile points. The bow and arrow's only been around for about 1,000 years. And so we think, oh, they always had a bow and arrow. That's like very recent technology in this part of the country. Other parts of the country had it sooner. It seemed to have come down, the technology came down from Alaska, down through Canada to the west, and then it moved across the United States. And things moved, technology moved very slowly. So we didn't get pottery or the bow and arrow until much later than most of the other tribes. So a lot of these are projectile points. They could also be knife blades. There are also drills in here. So these are tools. This is a Neolithic toolkit that you're seeing here. Tough to tell exactly what some of the things are until you look at the wear patterns. If it has wear on the tip, it's more likely to be an arrowhead. If it has wear along the edge and marks, it's most likely a knife blade. But a lot of these items were hafted. They were attached to a handle. 90% of what the Indians used, the Native Americans used, is gone because it was made of leather, bone, wood, things that rotted away, antler. The things that we have left are the stone, and those little bit of the stone. I mean, you could imagine if everything that we have went away except for the little pieces of metal, you know, what do those little pieces of metal tell, right? There's not that much on it. So a lot of what they had, we don't really have evidence for. What we have evidence for are the lithics. Here are 4 different lithics that are common here. Across the top we have jasper, we have quartzite, we have black chert, and we have rhyolite. These were all found in Chester County, and this shows what a Neolithic toolkit kind of consisted of. You needed to have a drill, and here you can see a drill of the 4 different kinds. You had to have a scraper, and again, here you see they're very similar, even when they're made of different things and from different times. This is what a knife blade looked like, again, hafted or handheld. And a point, we don't say arrowhead because again, a lot of them came from spear shafts or large darts, we would say. It's kind of like a really big arrow, but you're not shooting it from a bow. So they were hafted. Here is one of those points in a bone handle with a little bit of decoration. You can see how it would be used. And this is what a Neolithic tool kit might look like. You've got yourself a pair of basically the equivalent of your socks or shoes. Got twine. Twine would have been one of those very important things. You know, you don't have duct tape. How are you connecting things? How are you making things? So using twine, and those are made of natural plant fibers. You could also be using sinew. You see here that, again, the Neolithic toolkit here. We've got scrapers and razors and a hand axe. This is almost, this piece right here, this hand axe, that's like the Swiss Army knife of the Neolithic toolkit. You used it for everything. You could use it for chopping wood. You could use it for poking holes. Use it for killing a fish. I mean, all sorts of those different things. These are points from Kimberton, PA. This is a really nice dovetail. I wish the whole thing was intact. I don't know if it's part of a gorget, meaning that the other side looked the same and it was notched that way for a fiber to be tied on so that you could tie it around like a pendant. Or perhaps it is part of a spearhead, we can't really tell. But that dovetail at the bottom, it's just excellent stonework. You can see that. And these are both made out of jasper. I believe that's black chert, actually. So we got jasper, and some black chert there from Kimberton. This is part of the McAvoy collection. So Rachel McAvoy in the 1950s and 60s would walk their family's brickyards, which were located just past the Bull Tavern on Route 23 on the left there. And they would walk the fields and they would find these points, and then they would bring them home and they would give them to Grandma. And Grandma would, I think they called her Jemmy, she would sew them to these boards, these pieces of cardboard, and then Rachel would write little things like where she found them or what type of point it was. And they had 29 of these cards with over 500 points on them at one point, and that's part of their family collection. So the McAvoy collection is a very valued part of our collection at the Historical Society. Speaking of which, this is displays under construction, but what we have here are three very important points. This is our Clovis point we talked about. This is the obsidian razor that we talked about, and this is an argillite spear point, approximately 3000 BC, so about 5,000 years old. The thing that makes it special, it doesn't look very special, but it was found right down the street from our Historical Society. So it's kind of neat to think that, you know, these people were right there on that land. And here we can see a couple of those cards from the McAvoy collection that are going to be on display. And this is a quartz arrowhead I just threw together. All of those quartz pieces, by the way, were from Kimberton. I found two of them right in my front yard planting forsythias. Turned one over, boom, and there's an arrowhead. I'm like, no way. And so I'm telling my neighbor about it, and I'm like, look at this arrowhead I found. And we were like, 10 or 15 feet, and he's like, where'd you find it? I'm like, right over there, I was planting the thing. And he's like, and I just looked down, and there, what, just like this, and there was another one. And I was like, no way. So two right there within 15 feet of each other, both made of quartz, which is really neat because, that quartz doesn't flake very well, but it looks really pretty. So somebody was using it to make tools. This is jasper. This jasper the nearest source for this jasper are the Macungie old Indian quarries. It's up near in the steep sides of Lehigh Valley. That's approximately 25-mile walk from here as the crow flies. And you're not walking as the crow flies, right? You're going. So this jasper was either brought here by somebody else, or the people here went to those quarries, got this jasper, and brought it back. So again, could be evidence of prehistoric trade routes, but then again, a 25-mile walk was no big deal to a prehistoric hunter. They're often hunted, they would walk 40 miles to hunt and come back, see you in a week, bye, I'm gonna go. So there's that little quartz piece I'm playing with. We have all different kinds of points here. We have some that are true arrowheads. They're the small ones right here. And you can tell they're true arrowheads because they're light and they're small. They can fly through the air. These bigger ones are going to be spearheads because they're too big to put on an arrow. Bigger ones down here, these are probably knife blades. You couldn't even put that on a spear. This is probably a drill point over here. When you hold it in your hand, you feel the way that the tool maker chipped it and made it just so it fit in his hand just right so that he can poke holes into things and make stuff. And then down here at the bottom, we've got, again, some knives. And you can see this was almost shaped like a knife, right? And this is a hand knife. It fits in your hand really nice, almost like an Indian ulu, right? And you can cut with it. And when they're sharp, you can cut leather, very well with these. This is our new axe case. This is our axe collection over at the Historical Society. These stone axes are common all across the United States. Now we can tell some things about them. This one was found up on Nut Road. That's pretty cool. And this is a full hafted, so you can see that, full grooved. Goes all the way down the groove, you can see it there, and that is so that you could wrap something around it, like a branch, and you trim off the wood so the bark is there, you wrap that bark around and loop it back to the handle and tie it off. So that's called hafting, when you would put this onto something to use as a hammer. Well, it could be used to pound, the back could be used as a hammer, usually the front was used more like an axe. Tough to fell a tree with one of these though, you're not going to chop a tree down. So more often than not, when they needed to clear land or they wanted a tree for a canoe, tulip poplar was really good for that. They would take mud and they would make a girdle of mud around the tree, nice and thick, about 3 feet high, and then they laid a fire underneath. And they let that fire start getting to work at that tree. And as soon as the charcoal gets burned, they'd use these to knock that charcoal off, and now the fire can get at the wood again. And before long, that tree comes down, and then they actually used stone wedges to split it in half. You could imagine this big long tree, and we're just pounding stones into it until eventually it splits. And then they would use fire again to make this large dugout canoe, which they could then use on the Schuylkill River. It's basically your equivalent of a car, and the waterways were the equivalent of roads. You could take that waterway. By the way, the Schuylkill River is a Dutch name. It means the hidden river. The Native Americans colloquially called it like Manium, the place to drink. But that river in particular was the Gonshanhane, the noisy and rushing river, because if you went too far downriver towards the Delaware, you hit some falls, and it's right where the art museum is now. They've since turned it into a dam, but it used to be rapids. And the last thing you want to do is hit those rapids in your canoe, so interesting. Kewaukenak was the big village down there that William Penn eventually turned into Philadelphia. This is a full groove double bit axe, so both sides look like an axe. That was rather rare, found in the fields across from the Black Rock, so the fields between the nursing home and the Schuylkill River. Also found in those same fields, a 3/4 grooved axe. So this is later technology. This is like middle to middle to late archaic. They didn't make the full groove anymore. It changed. Somebody got the idea that, oh, if you set this in and you leave some room at the top where the room's going to be left, when the green plant that you use, green branch, to make the handle starts to dry, it shrinks up as that water goes away. And now my head is loose. So they left this 3/4 groove, so it's flat on the top, so now I can put a wedge in there. Pop a little wedge in there, and now it's tight again. Every time it gets loose, pop a new wedge in.
What kind of rocks were they making the hand axes out
A
of?
lot of these are granite.
Okay.
Yep, they wanted the hardest rock that they could find, and so
Right.
granite was one of those hardest rocks you could use around here for this purpose.
Okay.
And they're grinding this, so they're pecking it and grinding it.
Okay.
So I take a rock that's roughly the shape I'm looking for,
Yeah.
and then I start at it with a hammerstone. Hammerstone has to be at least as hard as the rock you're working on,
Yeah.
or harder, and you just peck, 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 and every time you're removing a little tiny bit of stone, and you just keep moving right around that until you've got the form that you want, and once you do, you start rubbing it onto another rock, and then you just
Okay.
keep rub until it starts getting smooth, and in the end you can get a polished 3/4 groove axe head like this. It must have taken so long to make, but there's no TV, you're not reading a book, so what else are you doing around the fire all night, right? We're telling stories, singing songs, and I'm making axe heads and chipping points and whatever else you might be doing. So these are some of those half-did axe heads. Here we see a full grooved axe head, so it goes all the way around. Here's another 3/4 groove. It has a flat top. That's so that you could drive the wedge through. And these are called celts. I used to call them celts until I learned better. It's spelled the same, C-E-L-T. But the idea was that later technology, so the earliest technology was the full groove, and then we go to the 3/4 groove, and then later by the Woodland period, they stopped making grooves altogether. They said, why are we making grooves? This is nuts. This thing gets all loose, and instead they would take a handle, and they would make a hole in it where this would fit in, and every time that I hit something, it pounded that stone into that hole a little bit more and made it tighter. And so this is the way that the new technology was to make a smooth, ungrooved cell that would then fit into that hole. And so that's what the other axes, newer axes, look like.
Was that the found like that with the wood, or?
No, these were not. There were some in Utah that were found in a salt cave that were, the actual handles were on them.
Wow.
Nothing around here survives that way. It's wet, it's acidic soil, it gets warm, and so, yeah, everything rots away. We get nothing like that, unfortunately, around here. Rare to even find something like these bone beads right down here that I have. There's a couple of those that are made of bone, and again, something that normally would rot away. Lucky to have those. This is a roller-type pestle. It comes from Lancaster County. It's probably Lenape, the Susquehannocks. Somewhere in there was the border between. We use rivers as borders. We say that river is the border, and this side's mine, and that side's yours. But the Native Americans used the rivers were where they lived, and the ridges were the borders. So the waterways, the watershed was mine. We own this watershed, and the native Lenape around here own the Schuylkill watershed. And so if any of the tributaries came to the Schuylkill, that was theirs. So they were going up the Pickering River, right? Pickering Creek goes all the way out to Kimberton, and you know, that same French Creek all the way up there. They were following all of those, and that was their land. Susquehannocks claimed the Susquehanna River, and they were out to the west. And then the Delaware, of course, the Delaware tribe, Delaware River, but of course Delaware is, again, it's an English word, right? Lord of the Ware, Delaware. Now, so the Indians didn't call it that, of course, but they claim that all as their own. This is an incredible piece of technology. It's a drill, a bow drill. I kind of have a little mock-up of one here. So the bow would wrap around a drill, and then you would have a stone with some sort of an indentation that you could apply pressure down, and then you could saw it back and forth. It's a little different than this one here. This one actually works by going up and down. You would still have to apply pressure onto the top, but you can see how you would get a lot of wraps around that cord as it wraps around and then unwinds, and the energy brings it back. Question? Oh, okay, very good. And they could drill through just about anything. I actually have a quartz piece that is drilled all the way through, and quartz is incredibly tough stone. So this is how they were drilling. Of course, you know, these would be beads. These are some of the stone beads I actually have in my collection. This is a cute little mud doll that we have in our collection. Now, this came from the McAvoy fields where they were finding a lot of arrowheads. We do not know that it's Native American. No effigies really have a smiley face on them. So, you know, maybe it's colonial. We don't know. Date unknown. Maker unknown. Weirdness high. It's a neat little piece. Yeah, it's pretty cute. These were net sinkers. So the Native Americans here got together a couple times a year, all together, the whole tribe would get together, and one of those times was when the shad ran in the spring, right? And actually, the shad were just one kind of fish. There were lots of different kind of fish that came up that Schuylkill River, and they knew right when they were coming, and they were ready for them. They had weirs that they built into the river by sticking sticks into the river, and that would direct the fish either into a corral or into a net. Some of the nets that they had made out of plant fibers were 100 yards long, and they had these net sinkers tied to the bottom to hold it to the bottom. And it would need probably 40 people to cross the Schuylkill and use this net effectively, but hey, if we get 40 people together, we get one big haul. Everybody, you know, we dry those fish, and then we all live fat on the hog for the rest of the, you know, for a while, till the fish are out, till we run out of dried fish. These are not Lenape people, but this fishing method is what I wanted to show you. You can see here, they, you know, just got that net streamed right across, and they've got sinkers on the bottom, and you just move your way across, trap those fish. These are, well, this is my illustration of Lenape. They've built a weir here. The weir is built so that the fish coming down river go in through and then are stuck in this little corral where they could be easily speared. Or I have some boys with some bows and arrows here. They're bringing the fish out and cleaning them. We can also see some things here such as when they became men, they got a haircut. They got all of the hair around here was plucked out, and they left a little 3 or 4 inch disc of hair right in the middle that was left really long. You can also see that they have tattoos. This one has a tattoo of a turtle. Perhaps he was part of the turtle clan. You can see that they have a dugout canoe up there that they're working in the river as well. So that's, and this is what life along the Schuylkill probably would have looked like in the spring. Another illustration, this one's from Herbert Kraft. You can see where I got my inspiration. I told you Kraft is one of the absolute experts of Native American archaeology in Pennsylvania. You can see the fish drying here, the different methods that they're using to dry the meat, and then those would be stored usually in containers, try to keep them fresh as long as they could. Here's a village. Now, village life in this area was not that common. Again, they'd get together for the big, you know, fish hauls and maybe for hunting, but a lot of times these longhouses were not around here. We don't have many reports of them. They were more like northern New Jersey. You start getting up closer to the Iroquois Indians, who did have longhouses like that. Longhouse like that would be 100 feet long and, you know, could house 50 people. your whole tribe. Around here, the wigwam was the preferred shelter of choice for a very, very long time. For 5,000 years, they lived in these same exact dome-shaped structures covered with bark. You can see they have a smoke hole at the top. He's got pottery here. So he's got a clay pot. We'll talk about the pottery in just a second. Again, that came very late to this part of the country. This is probably more crafts work. Again, we see these gentlemen building a wigwam up here. We've got, the river life down there at the bottom and various aspects of life going on throughout the picture. Again, how do we know about this? We know about it through the lithics, basically, because that's all that remains. There are some other clues as well. Remains of food things, right? They go through the refuse pits and they pull out every single little bone, and the archaeologists identify it and they figure out exactly what they were eating. And oh, look, they were breaking hickory nuts and they're charred, so they were cooking them, and they were this and that. And so boy, they can really squeeze a lot, archaeologists can squeeze a lot of information out of a site. But this is what life right along the Schuylkill probably looked like right here. Very simple. Oops, going backwards. Here we see some Lenape men again with that same haircut. They've got some of that red ochre you can see using. They love to have the red. They put it in bear grease. A lot of times you had bugs, right? Much of the year around here we have insects. No big problem for them as well. So they put clarified bear grease on their skin and in their hair, and it kept the bugs away. And also probably kept their skin looking great. Here is a wigwam. You can see that this is a structure made of saplings or trees that you could bend. You could also heat them up over a fire, and you can try to get some flexibility out of those. I would imagine, since these were semi-nomadic people, they would live in an area for 5 years, and then they had to move, right? The soils were getting depleted, the plants weren't growing as well as they used to, so time to move. Knowing that, I would imagine that when they are building one, they're starting and they're looking for their next site. Where are we going to be living in 5 years? And now's a good time to plant some of those saplings now. If I plant a circle of saplings in 5 years, they're going to be just the right size for me to bend over. And boy, that's a lot easier than digging holes and putting, packing that in. A little bit of foresight. These were not dumb people, and they had foresight. They knew what the seasons were like and usually what they would bring. This is life inside of a wigwam. This is, I believe, New Jersey, one of the museums there. You can see again that haircut that the men had, right? All of this was plucked out except for a piece here in the back. We've got pottery again, so that's telling us this is the woodland period. This is what they used before pottery. This was the first thing that they did, that they used besides bark baskets. So you could actually boil things and cook things in a bark basket or in an animal skin container, like a bladder, something like that. But this is a steatite bowl. Steatite is basically soapstone, and these soapstone bowls were made by first chipping away and making a dome of rock. So I found a soapstone outcropping, and might have to travel very far to go to these places. And then you would chip it until it makes the bowl shape, and then break it off, and then they would flip it over and they would hollow out the inside. And we know this because we have many bowls that are half made right there, that people chip and chip and chip in, and obviously we can see all the different stages that they were using to make these steatite bowls. Here we see one. So this is the blank that they basically took off of the rock, and then they have to start chipping away the insides, and in the end they would end up with a bowl like this that they could actually cook in. And the lugs on the side were so that you could pick it up, and if it got hot, I imagine you use some leather pot holders. When steatite bowls went out of fashion, for a while they must have been very important. They must have had ceremonial importance because they broke up the steatite bowls, crushed them into a fine powder or grain, and then they would use that to temper their clay pots. So they took the old pots and made them into the new pots. So they must have had some importance. This is a really important pot that we have. It is possibly the most complete pot of its type ever found. This was found on the Susquehanna River again by Pico, so I imagine that's where we got this piece from. The missing pieces were filled in. Somebody did an excellent job putting this thing back together. It's a really neat example of early pottery. Going the wrong way again. Okay, this is what came later then, the red clay pots. This is all found in Chester County. It has this very distinctive pattern on it. What they were doing, this is how smart they are. So the more surface area there was on the pot, the better the heat transferred. And so by pressing cordage into the clay while it was wet, you were essentially roughing up the surface and increasing the surface area of the pot so that now thermodynamics worked better. So maybe it kept them from cracking, I'm not sure. I don't use clay pots, I'd have to do a little more investigation. But yeah, this came much later for us. If you think about it, over 6,000 years ago in the Middle East, they have pottery. And it's not until, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago that we finally get that here in Pennsylvania. And then we have the contact. So the woodland Indians made contact with the Europeans, and here we see them trading for stuff, and this was the beginning of the downfall for the Lenape. The Lenape, which means the people, the original people, they were often called the grandfather tribe. They were here for so long. They knew how to live in harmony with the environment, how not to over forage areas. They knew when to move. Everything went great. And then they started to lose their land by trickery and deceit usually. The walking purchase in the 1730s was by William Penn's kid or grandkid, and they took all of William Penn's great ideas of, hey, let's not cheat the Indians, let's try to buy the land from them. The concept, by the way, which the Lenape did not understand, they thought that all of these gifts meant, we want to share your land. Cool, share it. And then I come back to my hunting grounds and now you build a house and told me to go away. And it's like, what are you talking about? We're sharing, right? And so now they wanted things. And the only way to get things was to produce hides. So now instead of just taking as many beaver or raccoon as I need, I'm taking as many as I can get so that I can trade them for things. And soon they're over hunting and over foraging the land. This particular painting always makes me think of when the British were crossing the Schuylkill River just before the winter of 1777, I guess it was, when we stayed in Valley Forge. So the British crossed. Of course, we all know that there was a monument that was over by the Val Rio Diner that said the farthest inland point by the British during the invasion. Basically, they came in from Tredyffrin down Nut Road, and then they took that hard right there at the Fountain Inn, went up Bridge Street, and then they crossed at the ford. There wasn't a bridge there, so it wasn't Bridge Street at the time. So they crossed at the ford there, and there were still Native Americans living here, and that might have been how they looked watching them go across. By the way, while they were going across, they were singing their hymns because the colonial army was shooting at them. So that was, and they had to march across, in straight lines while people are shooting at you in the middle of a river. That was probably not fun. Here we have some Lenape, and they're looking at what basically would have been the equivalent of their language, their writing. They didn't have a system of writing the way we did. They used pictographs. They recorded those things on skins. Those items, again, did not survive in our environment. So unfortunately, a lot of that history just got lost. All we're left with are the oral traditions. Here we see the Lenape around a British fort. Again, cheated out of their land, pushed west. Proclamation of 1763 pushed them west of the Appalachian Mountains. There's a story about a team that was making a road to Pittsburgh, and he was kidnapped by some Indians. Actually, they killed 300-400 British, and for whatever reason kept him alive. And they beat him up a bit, and they made him run a line. So they had all the Indians in a line. They made him run down the line, and they said, get to the end as fast as you can. And he tried, but they beat him up real bad. He didn't quite make it, and he was unconscious. He woke up in a French hospital in a fort, probably like that. He recovered. The Indians reclaimed him, and then they said, we beat the white out of you, you're now an Indian. And so they plucked all of his hair out, and they said, you're an Indian. And he lived with them for 4 years, and he wrote a book about that, and those about especially Native American tactics. And I believe that book was then used later during, when we fought them during French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War for tactics. Okay, did I go that way? Am I going this way? Yes. Okay, down. So here again, we're seeing Lenape tribes, and they're carrying guns. So this is obviously post-contact. And here we see again, we've got pendants, we've got the turkey feathers here in the hair, right? That's gorgeous. We've got beads, beadwork. Wampum was made of shells. They're eating fish. We got the fish in the basket. All little glimpses of life. This is what a Lenape warrior probably would have looked like again, but he's wearing a linen shirt. And he probably has a metal bracelet on. So those are signs that this was a post-contact, conceptual drawing. This is me standing atop of Indian Rock, or Indian Point, here in Phoenixville. This is the Black Rock, and this is a point that extends out over the river. And Samuel Pennypacker tells us in the book Tales of Phoenixville that there was once a Native American who was so down on his luck that he took a bet from some white colonists, European colonists, that said, hey, jump off of this 3 times and we'll give you a bottle of mashed whiskey. So the story is he went up and he jumped off once and he made it, but he came up a little banged up. And he did the jump again, and again he's a little, he's bruised, he's cut, he'll bleed a little bit. The 3rd time, he just didn't come up. So, and that has been called Indian Point ever since. On Earth Day, I lead a walk down to Indian Rock, something that my dad did back when I was a kid. It wasn't Earth Day back then, but he would lead walks down to Indian Rock. So I still do it today, take people down when it's safe. We had to cancel this year because of the rain. I included this story in my book, Tales of Phoenixville. I did narrative fiction because I think just telling the story sometimes is a little dry. And so it's called historical fiction because I used a narrative tone, but I feel that the storytelling is so much better that way. But if you wanted to know more about the Native Americans here in Pennsylvania, I included a lot of facts in my story about Indian Rock, and this is my drawing of him making his final leap off of there. Tales of Phoenixville, that's my book. Again, they call it historical fiction, but it's as much fact as I could, possibly squeeze in. These were stories that I was told by my father, and then, read in Pennypacker's Tales of Phoenixville. I would tell to my 5th graders all the time. And then I had kids, and my wife was a nurse, and she could make overtime and made more money than me anyway. So, and I had the elementary education degree. So I stayed home with the kids. And I thought to myself, wow, what am I going to do with these stories? I love telling the kids. I feel like people in Phoenixville need to know these stories. So I started writing them down, and 10 years later, I self-published Tales of Phoenixville. It's available at the Gateway Pharmacy and down at Reed's and Company, and you can also buy it online at a number of places. If you just search my name, you can find it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes my talk. Mark, the screen's went black.
That was probably your last slide.
Okay, do you need to reset something so people can see me?
They can see you.
Okay, wonderful.
Yep.
Okay.
They can still see you.
So if people can see me, what I'd like to do is open up the floor to any questions. Yes, the cute young lady in the back.
I went to the Indian Rock before.
You did? Was it scary? You weren't scared? I'm scared when I'm up there.
I found a chair there. And a little
chair?
table.
And were they chained to a tree? I saw that. Somebody must go up there and have a good time. Yeah. All right. That's great. I am glad that you got up there. Wonderful. So let's start talking, I guess, since we don't have any questions, or do we have any, Mark?
Anybody on Zoom want to chime in? Feel free to unmute or type in the chat. Got a couple of thank yous. Great presentation. Right?
Yes.
So this may be an inane question, but so leather, plant material, fibers and stuff have gone. So fish weirs, things that were made of plant material, is that coming from observations from Europeans who are
Yeah,
meaning the-
descriptions of
Lots of-
what they encountered
Yeah.
when they came in. Usually these were missionaries. So the first people in were the missionaries. Actually, the very first person here, not very first, but one of the first Europeans was Charles Pickering. So we all know about Charlestown and Pickering Creek. These are all named after a treasure hunter named Charles Pickering. He was a friend of William Penn's, and William said, hey, here's some land, and he said, I'm going prospecting, and he started his way up the Schuylkill River, and he would stop every so often, and he would, had the pans, and he would run it, and he started finding little bits of galena and traces of silver, and he tracked that up the Schuylkill and then up the Pickering Creek, and then he ended up right in behind what's Baker Park, behind the YMCA. That's where he found this outcropping of silver. And so he went back, he got a buddy named Tinker, he came back out here. Tinker Hill is named after him, if you know Tinker Hill. And so they dug out a little cave to live in. They were probably here for a month or two. They filled a bunch of flour barrels full of ore, and they somehow got him to fill it. In my story about Charles Pickering, where I tell all about that, I actually have him making a little pact with the Indians to use their canoes to get that ore down there, because there weren't any roads. You're not getting it there on horseback through the woods. So Charles Pickering got that to Philly, sent it to Europe, back to England. A couple months later, silver came back, and they said, here's the silver from all of that ore. And he said, this is all I get from all of that ore? I ain't going back out there. So he never came back out here. And then he took that silver and he made Spanish bits out of it. And then he used it to buy things. And then soon, William Penn came knocking. Are you making Spanish bits? And they said, that's the crime, you're not allowed to do it. And so they said, you gotta go and pay everybody in real bits. He said, my silver's just as good as theirs. They said, you gotta go pay them in real bits. Give us the silver that you did, and then they built a new courthouse or something with the silver. So, Charles Pickering, not only a treasure hunter and one of the first Europeans here, but first counterfeiter here as well. So, yeah, very, very cool. Our own, local felon. There we go. All right, so the Lenape that were here, basically were here and living in their wigwams, and they had their summer homes, winter homes, and those were off away from the little village. And so they would live in the village for a while, again, usually for fishing or something like that. They'd get together, and then they would move out to their summer homes to hunt and forage so that they would never over-forage different areas. I see another hand, yes?
I want this, it's this. So, how did the Indian not make it the last time, and what happened after he did it that jumped
That's
off
a
the
good
bird?
question. Maybe he hit a rock and hit his head, but I guess in the end he drowned because he never came up. And maybe it's just a story, and maybe it never happened, or maybe it did happen. We don't know. It's a legend.
But
Yeah.
I do know that he jumped off the rock and didn't make it enough to the deep end.
Yes, and now it's very, very shallow down there. I don't know if I'd make it one time. Die of fright just standing there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about I got a couple more minutes, do I, Mark?
Yeah. A
Wonderful.
comment from Zoom. She said she got your book after your last presentation here and really appreciates you keeping local history alive.
Excellent. And again, I do this kind of as a tribute to my dad. My dad was big on this local history stuff, and so, a good way to kind of keep that going. So let's talk quick about their religious beliefs. This is something that comes up sometimes. So the Lenape people believed in Kisheli Mukong, the great creator who spun us into reality with his thoughts. Kisheli Mukong then left us. He left the world. He spun it into existence, and then he gave the Menetu, or the spirits of the world, control and said, you take care of this. And everything had a spirit. The rocks had a spirit, the sun has a spirit, the water has a spirit. And so you needed to respect things, because if you weren't a respectful person, the Menetu would punish you. And there was also a guardian of the forest, Masingwa. Masingwa is on the Delaware Indian logo right now. And by the way, I sometimes use the word Indian. So does the Delaware tribe. They don't call themselves the Delaware tribe of Native Americans. They call themselves the Delaware tribe of native Indians. Now, Indians comes from when Christopher Columbus came here and thought that he was somewhere else, and he called them Indios, which means children of God. And so you can't get much better, I believe, than children of God. Calling them Native Americans just names them after Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian map maker, so it's like, that's no better. But anyway, the Lenape that were here, the grandfather tribe, the original people, they were here apparently before a lot of the other tribes, and they were sometimes known as peacemakers, that they would be the ones that would go, and if two tribes had a problem, they would go to the Lenape and say, hey, can you guys work this out for us? So, in the woods, there was a keeper of the forest. And this was a large man covered with black fur like a bear. Now, what does this sound like? Exactly. Misingwa. And Misingwa is on their crest to this day. They have a face, and the face is half black and half red, and that is Misingwa. And in their ceremonial place where they would go, a house where they would have 12 was a magic number, and of course 12 is the number of months in the year, right? They knew these different things. And so there were 12 pairs of sticks that went around that represented the 12 heavens that you went to before you got to Kasheli Mukong. And by the way, he was not a person, or he was just light, just bright light at the highest level of heaven that you could go to. But you had to make it through 12 levels of heaven, and there was a journey to get to that light after you passed away. But Misingwa, let's get back to him for just a second. They said Misingwa would ride through the woods on the back of a stag, and that he would watch over the animals. And you didn't want to be a bad person, because Misingwa would punish you. He could make you mute so that you couldn't speak, or dumb so that you were just like, and or he could kill you. So you had to be very careful not to be a bad person. I don't mind your questions. Go ahead. What do you got?
What do they use to chip the rocks and like the crystals?
There's a great question. You used a hammerstone at first. So a hammerstone had to be harder than the rock you were using, that you were trying to make. And so I would use a big rock at first, but then I needed to make little teeny chips, and I couldn't do that with a big rock. So I needed something a little softer and a little finer, and they often use a piece of antler, deer antler. And I would put a piece of cloth or leather over my leg so that I don't cut my leg, and then I would push down until a pop of flake come off the other side, and I would just keep popping those little flakes off, and before you know it, you could shape it into different shapes. And you could also make it very, very sharp. I have a knife here. This is a hand knife. I'll pass it around real quick. You can see, take that little groove, you kind of put it in your hand, and you can feel how it fits right there, and you could just cut away. I also have a bone knife. Did they have bone knives? Yeah, most likely, but again, put it in acidic soil for 1,000 years, and you're not going to have anything left. We do have the pottery fragments. The clay did last. This is the quartzite. I think it's a mouthpiece to I'm not really sure, right? It could have been a gorget or some kind of a pendant, but a mouthpiece for a peace pipe would be a good idea as well. Either way, somebody somehow managed to drill this almost perfect hole through a piece of quartz. I couldn't do this right now with my Black & Decker drill. If I went to Ace and got a brand new bit, I couldn't do it like this. So unbelievable. Actually, I've looked at it so closely. They came in from this side, and then they came in from this side, and the holes don't quite match up perfectly, but they're pretty close. And you think this would have had to have been held so still, almost in a vise. And then the drill had to go in completely straight. You can't be zigging and zagging. So unbelievable. How they pulled this off, I don't know. It's an amazing piece. So I'll pass a little bit of these around so you can take a look. Flint hand axe, right from the black rock, right here. And so again, this is a hand tool. This is how you held it. And you could use it to cut and to do things. So here you go. Pass these around. There's one there. There's one there. And I'll do a couple on this side. That's the hand axe, and here is a knife.
So the Lenape was in the Pennsylvania area?
The Lenape were here in the Pennsylvania area because the Susquehanna was a tributary of the Delaware River. And they had everything from the Delaware all the way to the coast. So they were in New Jersey, a bit of Delaware, and into Pennsylvania, this part of Pennsylvania. And again, once the watershed for the Schuylkill Lens On the other side of that was Susquehannock territory. They were a different tribe. Good question. Yes?
What is the Black Rock Lake you're referring to? Like, we know Black Rock Dam, and we know that.
Yeah, great question. So a lot of times we have people come to the Historical Society and ask us, where's this black rock, right? And like there's a particular black rock. But what it is, it's the entire formation of Tunnel Hill over here on the north side of town where the tunnel goes under, the railroad tunnel. And it's called the Black Rock Tunnel because it goes through this geologically very dark rock. I'm not sure if it's black chert. I think that's pretty much, or it might be a argillite. I'm not real sure. My dad was the geologist. He'd be whacking me right now. Back of the head. You should know that. Yeah, so the black rock is on the north side, and it's that outcropping of rock that's resulted in cliffs going down to the river. So it was a very hard outcropping of rock that the river was not able to wear away, and so the river had to make this big thumb of land, big circuit around this thumb of land. And we find a lot of points on that thumb of land. And people are like, well, why? I guess people were living up there. I've heard, oh, you went up there because then you could see, this is another historian, one of my fellow historians, but may I disagree, that you were up there so that you could see invaders coming. You could see war tribes. We were deep in the heart of Lenape Hoking. Who is attacking us here? Nobody, yet alone, if I'm a war party, what, I'm building huge fires so you can see the smoke? No way, I'm coming up the river, you're never gonna see us coming, right? So the fact that they were living on the Black Rock to watch for enemies or to protect against enemies doesn't make any sense. But what does make a lot of sense is, again, the hunting practices. You don't want to work any harder than you have to. And we need to guarantee that we get enough to last us through the year. Now, if all of you are going to go out and go hunting on your own, trying to sneak up on a deer with an addle, I mean, we know how hunters with guns come home empty-handed, right? So it's tough, but if we all got together once a year at a certain time of the year, and again, they knew how to read the calendars and they knew when, we meet and we start rushing, you flush all the game up onto that thumb of land, and now they're trapped. And now we basically have a skirmish line, right? We've got 50, 60 guys, and we're walking that, we're each, 100 feet apart. Anything that comes past, we were going up the thumb of land, all those animals are getting more panicked, and they're either gonna get trapped there, or they're gonna try to run through us, and then, so we get way more venison that way than we ever would hunting all by ourselves. So I think, my personal theory, yet to be proven, is that the Black Rock was used as a hunting corral for deer. I think they probably did it every year. That's what I would do, right? Makes sense. So I could think of it. They thought of it, right? Absolutely. Yeah, these were not dumb people. All right, what do we got? Any other questions?
So the Port Kennedy Bone Cave, where exactly in Valley Forge Park is that located? I understand it's covered in asbestos, but if I wanted to point it out there and just tell you, over there is where it was.
Absolutely,
where would I point?
So the visitor center, you know where that is?
Yes, yeah.
So if you were to, let's say, draw a line between the visitor center and the church,
Okay.
it's right down past the parking lots.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a cliff. So there's a sharp cliff, and then there's a flat area, and it's right underneath that flat area.
Okay.
And my dad was very involved in trying to locate it. They got one of those seismographers, I'm probably saying the wrong word, but a seismometer. It was putting, the sound waves or whatever into the ground. They were bouncing back so they could tell where it was. So they located it. They know where it is, but again, it's under that asbestos, and because it's waste, it's trapped there. We can't get to it. But yeah, so does that give you enough of an idea there?
That's helpful, yeah. That's helpful.
Some idea there?
Some idea, yeah. Appreciate that.
As soon as you go around that real sharp turn,
Yeah.
and then the visitor center's up on your right,
Yeah.
if you take a really sharp turn down that little road, it's right off on your right-hand side there.
That little road right on the right-hand side, okay.
Yeah,
Picture.
yeah.
It's kind of like a cliff.
And there's a cliff there,
Cliff,
exactly.
That's where it is, okay.
Yes,
Okay, yep,
and there's
yep.
a little cave in that cliff called Hole in Rock.
Ah, okay.
And spent lots, when I was a kid, I used to love going to Hole in Rock. Yes?
How do they make, when they wear, the Indian clothes, how do they make it?
So first they had to shoot the deer, And if I were to make leather clothes like this, and then we would have to take the skin off the deer. And then you would take that skin and you would have to scrape off all of the fleshy, meaty part, and that just leaves this leather. And then they would treat this leather with different things they would put on it. It's gross, but they would take the animal's brains and they would smush the brains up and they rub it on the skin, and it's called brain tanning, and it's what they used to do. I know, and it worked. And it made this nice skin, and then they would take it and they would rub it and sometimes chew it until it got soft. And then when it got real soft like this, you could make it into clothes by cutting it and poking holes to put the needle through, and you could sew it with a bone needle.
But like, how do they put it on? Like,
And then they would, thank you. So I took this deer skin and I made it into a shirt, see? And they would put it on just like a shirt or a pair of pants. I made this out of a piece of buckskin while my kids were at lunch one day because I was doing my Native American talk, and I said, wouldn't it be cool if I had a shirt? And I said, I got a leather. And so I didn't have all the things on it, but I sewed it and everything while they were at lunch. So it doesn't quite fit me real great because I didn't really tailor it, I threw it together. But it's a good idea, good representation of a Plains Indian hair shirt, basically. These would be parts of scalps.
I saw you
These
in
would
one
be
of the
things that.
I saw you in one of the pictures wearing that.
Wearing this, yes, I've been wearing this for a long time. It's not quite Lenape, so I don't really, I gotta go for more Lenape authentic now that I do a more Lenape oriented talk. All right, yes.
Wearing burial grounds? It doesn't quite fit in my hand.
Yes, no, we don't really have, I've never heard of an Indian graveyard around here or a burial ground.
Go.
That's a great question.
You don't have an answer.
I do not.
Okay.
I will check that out.
I think
Perhaps
the
they.
Pennypacker book talked about the different burial ground up, I think, where the old Chico farm was, I think. If I recall correctly.
I'll check it out.
Check out the Pennypacker book. I think he mentioned that in that area.
I will.
It was
I
a
definitely
burial
will.
ground, yeah.
Nice, good. All right, you got me thinking now. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Anybody on this side want to take a look at the quartz mouthpiece? That's really incredible. And the stone knife. There you go.
Yeah, we saw those.
Saw those? All right, great. Making their way around. This is a mortar type pestle. This was probably used for grinding up grain in a mortar or a depression in a rock or in wood.
So
And
is
so
that
you
also made by the pecking, where you just
Yep.
tap that way at it?
So this was probably a different shaped stone, and then
Yeah.
they pecked it until they got that shape, exactly. And then once you had this shape, and spent a long time using it, so you passed this on until eventually it probably got lost. And one of the ways how would you lose something like this? Well, we have our wigwam, and we gotta go to the river, and it's 7 miles to the river. I'm not carrying all of this stuff. So these things waited at our wigwam. Maybe we would even, bury them in a piece of leather so that, those stone tools stayed there. And then we went to the river and, something bad happened and, I don't know, maybe I got sick or whatever and died and never went back to the wigwam, and then these things sat there. And so that's one of the ways that they got lost, right? They weren't really discarded. It's not like you're like, well, that's a piece of junk and you throw it away. I mean, they still worked and were very useful and took a long time to make. Thank you. Yes?
Any evidence that the Lenape took stones and made any kind of structures?
Yeah, so cairns like the ones found up in Ole are very mysterious because no, in the archaeological record, it doesn't seem like they built stone structures, and yet we have stone structures. We have these cairns, and who made them? We don't really know. Were they farmers that made them? You would think that if you're a farmer, you just make a wall, right? Why are you going to take all that time to build this thing in the middle? So yeah, we have some very mysterious, monolithic almost construction here in Pennsylvania it's weird. Who made it? We don't know because you can't date stone. You need something else. You need some kind of organic material, and with none of that, in direct relation to the builders, whoever made that, we gotta take a guess. We know surprisingly little about the Indians that lived in this area because the Europeans came and they
Yeah,
brought
brought
diseases.
smallpox.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
brought smallpox, they killed them all, boom, and then next, first thing you know, 90% of them are gone just due to disease. So there goes their culture, and along with the culture, then we built all of our buildings, and we just, the archeological sites got plowed over and built over, and all of that information's gone. Even the Lenape people themselves, they know a lot about their history, but not like out west,
Yeah.
Out west, those cultures were intact for a longer period of time and were studied.
I mean, the cultures are still active.
And some are even still, right, yes, exactly. Exactly.
What kind of diseases happened back then?
Well, smallpox, cholera, dysentery, these were all bad things that people still get in poor countries where they
Except
don't have
smallpox.
clean water and things like that, except for smallpox. Well, I guess it's not, is it eradicated worldwide?
I
What
believe there
are
are two
they?
vials that we can't, and there's an argument over whether the Endangered Species Act applies to them.
Yeah, no, it does not. Let them go the way of the dodo, right?
I think they're kept, what I was taught was they're kept because we might need that to
Yeah,
do more
right.
vaccines if they ever,
If it springs its ugly head up again.
Yeah. but we're very glad that it's only in 2 little vials.
Yes, but some of the diseases were diseases that the white Europeans, it didn't hurt them. It made them a little sick, but then the natives never ever got those diseases before, so it made them really sick, and then they would die. Yeah. Sometimes the Europeans tried to take them as slaves. It did not work. They died in captivity, like taking a wild animal and putting it in captivity. It's like their spirit just withered and died. And the African people were very, they had this, I'm gonna live, I'm gonna do this. And the Native Americans were like, this isn't life, I'm just gonna go. So yeah, it's very interesting, they could not enslave the Native Americans. Yeah, didn't work. Any other questions? Heck of a way to go out. Please visit us at the Historical Society on June 22nd. We have some exciting stuff. First off, I've been personally curating, and my mentor and cohort named Crime, Paul Cusco, is not here tonight. If he's on Zoom,
He is on
can
Zoom.
hear me. I hope he can. He just got shoulder surgery, or I would have loved to have had him here tonight, but the two of us are working very hard at curating the Native American collection there. And then I've also kind of created a paleontology wing that is in a whole new edition. So we would love to have you down in addition to all of that Phoenixville history that is, post-European contact. Now we've got all that prehistory as well. Fun stuff. We would love to see you. And I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight, giving your time. I want your question too. Go ahead, what's your last question? Because you're so smart.
How do rocks turn into stones?
Stones and rocks are kind of the same thing. That's
I
a
meant like
really good
crystals.
question. Like crystals, right. So a stone would have to be underground, and under the ground you have lots of rocks on top, and they're heavy. They're so heavy, they're pushing down on it, and it also gets very hot. And so pressure and heat can turn a rock into a crystal. That's one way.
How will it get its color?
Different chemicals in it. So if it has, certain chemical, it could be a purple, and then we call it amethyst. And then other ones are red, and we call it a ruby because it has a certain, iron in it or whatever makes rubies red. Again, my dad's like smacking me from heaven. How do you not know this stuff, kid? I lived with it, I grew up with it. But when you grow up with this stuff, you take it for granted, right? And then you're like, oh, and then he's gone, and then you're like, ooh, I should have paid more attention. But yeah, thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Joe.
I appreciate you all coming out today. Thank you so much. Thank you. What's your name?
Thanks everyone on Zoom too.
Anna, you have great questions. I would love to be your school teacher.